While re-listening to The Biggest Problem in the Universe recently, I've come to realize one of the keys to its addictive appeal, and in so doing also discovered part of what's made one of its co-hosts' solo podcasts so compelling, and the others so lackluster. I've got work to do, damn it! And yet this podcast makes the urge for just one more so powerful that resisting it is a monumental struggle. Like the temptation to plunge your hand back into that bag of chips after you'd set it aside, swearing you'd be stopping your self-indulgence there. The stated goal of working towards determining the one true biggest problem in the universe is of course both hyperbolic and highly farcical, and from the start of the podcast is lampooned by its host as such, but that's for the best. The narrative becomes much more personal. As far removed from the titular lofty ambitions as it could be, the story we witness unfolding as we tune in episode after episode is one of pride, prejudice, and perhaps most importantly, pettiness. Its two self-described assholes each possess their own strange and often difficult to entirely follow thought processes, along with large enough egos that they've got an extreme degree of investment in being the winner in any given episode. The creation of tension that this setup leads to is simply outstanding. For any given problem, the particular stakes of its success or failure have a uniqueness to them. The co-host who brought it up sees it as an issue, and thus has a very specific gripe about it that they're seeking validation of. The audience is left to anticipate the particular type of vindication that will be taken by its success, or the angered disappointment that will accompany its failure. Then there's the stakes for the co-host who didn't bring it up, also something that has significant variety. In cases where they object to it being deemed a problem at all, you've got a legitimate battle of ideas set up. A zero-sum game where one's victory and elation will come with the other's defeat and devastation. Things get slightly more complicated when they agree that it is an issue. Now this co-host is balancing just how much he deems it to be a problem with his desire to downplay or discredit it in order to give their own gripes the top spot.
A bunch of them with fucking robots that don't work. Right.
Okay, hold on. I feel like you're making a lot of sense right now. You gotta slow down.
Yeah. So,
in some instances, we'll get a Weasley war of attrition, giving up ground but still making small objections, attempting to undermine the level of importance given to that problem. In others, the white flag is simply waved, and we witness the life slowly drain out of their voice like a deflating bouncy house, as they can tell that this issue, something uncontestable like female genital mutilation, will be the inevitable winner this week, and that all of their efforts will be for naught. The sheer amplitude of differing arrangements of deep emotional stakes that can result from this setup is incredible, and this is even before the stakes for the viewer themselves. A number of the problems will also elicit strong feelings one way or another from the viewer, and thus things get personal. You now have a side. The voting mechanic only furthered this investment, allowing you to make your voice heard as someone who would help to determine the outcome, and now having a team that you're a part of. The confounding logic of these two co-hosts is really integral, because it keeps that outcome a mystery, both to the audience, now eagerly anticipating what exactly the results will end up being, and to the co-hosts themselves, who are in many cases truly left wondering about who will end up being victorious, which convoluted argument will end up resonating with the audience more effectively. This works wonders for the structure of the show as well, front-loading every episode with the bulk of the guaranteed pathos and emotional payoff to get you engaged and hooked right from the start, before proceeding to lay the groundwork for next week's drama with the rest of the episode. It's both a brilliant cliffhanger for its original weekly format, and a fantastic facilitator of binge listening. It's about time we got to a real problem here. Maddox's new podcast. The Best Debate in the Universe has far more structural similarities to Biggest Problem than Dick's show, and yet fails to capture almost any of this appeal. The personal stakes are gone almost entirely. Maddox grew to resent the nature of Biggest Problem as a competition, and in so doing missed just how integral that was. There's no victory or defeat, no triumph or heartbreak to his podcast. There's no pathos. There's also no anticipation. Just like in Biggest Problem, we are left wondering about something every week. In this case, which side of Maddox's debate with himself he falls on. But in almost every episode, his true stance is glaringly obvious. Just as with Biggest Problem, he lampoons the blatant farce of this central conceit of his show. But by doing so, he reveals just how much of a moron he truly is. He doesn't seem to get that this worked with Biggest Problem because it wasn't actually the compelling part of the podcast. And this mockery even served to guide viewer expectations, to direct them towards that personal narrative that took precedence there. There's nothing in place of the central conceit that's being mocked in the case of Best Debate, though. The only point of any potential intrigue ends up being how much the viewers' collective opinion ended up shifting after hearing out Maddox's arguments. This is a somewhat novel little social experiment, but after it becomes clear that he's got a specific side he thinks you should be falling on, any semblance of actual potential insight is lost, and those numbers become basically meaningless. There is simply nothing to get emotionally invested in to any noteworthy degree here, and Maddox's inherent comedic talents aren't nearly enough to carry a show without that. More often than not, his quips ended up being based in just how low-hanging or stupid they were, as opposed to being genuinely witty or evocative. And without a powerful personality to bounce them off of and start up an entertaining back and forth, they're limply tossed out and promptly fall flat. He attempted to replicate the structure and formula, but did so without bringing with it any of the heart, and, well, you can see the results of that yourself. Dick also attempted some of that replication when starting up his podcast, and, I mean, with Biggest Problem having been as wildly successful as it was, who wouldn't be drawing upon it when scrambling to create a new podcast in the space of a few weeks? But he did something more important than that. He kept it personal. In its first episode, after the theme has played and introductions have been made, Dick immediately begins questioning the present company, in the form of an amusingly confounding metaphor, if he really deserves all of this, wondering why is the universe trying to fuck me? And in these opening minutes, his show has exhibited more pathos and genuine human drama than Best Debate will in the entirety of its runtime. He proceeds to offer a eulogy of sorts for the old podcast, and an expression of heartfelt gratitude towards its listeners. By contrast, the first episode of Best Debate begins with a dry explanation of the mechanics of this new show, and then a brief history of Maddox's childhood interest in radio broadcasting, with no mention of the prominent issue on everyone's minds, the death of the old show. Dick gets into a discussion of passion projects, the pain of moving on, and the transience of things almost instantly. He isn't discussing them in lofty, abstract terms. He's relating them directly to his own personal experiences grappling with the breakup of Biggest Problem over the past few weeks. Experiences that his audience has shared in. This is powerful. This is personal. This is also what becomes the focal point of the Dick Show. Structural gimmicks like the once again farcical grand objective of holding a competition in search of a co-host fade away as the weeks pass, and the true draw becomes more apparent. He lets the personal take precedence. With one of the greatest soap operas of modern times playing out in real time to serve as a narrative backdrop, Dick only needs to let us into his life. And because of how poignantly he can express the emotions inherent in the ups and downs of day-to-day existence, his show ends up opening our hearts and minds like an impossibly adept therapist, taking a funnel and pouring all of that pathos directly into them. There's no format here adding stakes to things. Dick creates his own stakes. From mounting dread over the prospect of having to make good on a vow to eat his own book, leading to stunned euphoria when against all odds he somehow wins that bet, to an ongoing battle over his reputation that has him losing friends and colleagues at every turn, while also strengthening his bond with those people who do continue to stand by him, to the existential horror of having to deal with that box of assorted cables everyone has lying around somewhere. We're led through a whole spectrum of emotions and experiences, one with so much variety in the emotions explored and so much depth to each one of these emotional experiences that the show becomes endlessly engaging. Lost in all the stats, studies, and Salon.com stories Maddox is bringing in is the reason any of these debates are engaging in the first place. It isn't about reaching some enlightening conclusion. Dude, the point of your last show was how that whole objective is stupid. These debates were entertaining because watching someone who is so dense that they'd somehow missed that fact, duking it out with someone who is so blatantly uninvested in this concept of formal debate that everyone except Maddox can see it clearly, created a special kind of friction that brought a lot of raw human emotions to the forefront. Biggest Problem in the universe was something incredibly special, and ended up connecting to many people because of it. And while it can't ever recapture that specific spark, the Dick Show has grown out of the ashes that were left behind and into quite the impressive blaze in its own right. It has fan art, tribute songs, interpersonal drama, boxing matches springing up all around it. A rich community brimming with passion and conflict and life has been fostered, because the Dick Show itself is so deeply entrenched in the experience of living and everything that comes with it. Best Debate in the universe lacks that life, that humanity, and for all the numerous other critiques that can be made against it, that is the most damning.
You know that feeling you get in your heart? Some days, man. Where you feel like nothing can go wrong.